The sky above Europe in late 1943 was a freezing, chaotic expanse where the concept of American air superiority was being forged in fire and illumined. For years, the strategic bombing campaign had been a bloody equation of attrition, a calculus, where the lives of 10 men in a B-17 Flying Fortress were weighed against the industrial output of the Third Reich. The bombers were dying. They were falling from the sky in burning spirals. Victims of the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt Bf-19 Focke-Wulf FW-190s that slashed through the formations with impunity once the short-legged Allied fighter escorts were forced to turn back. The theory that the bomber will always get through was being disproven by the jagged holes tearing through the fuselage of the 8th Air Force. The crews called them the Little Friends, the fighters that were supposed to protect them. The friends were leaving too soon, abandoning the heavy bombers to a gauntlet of flak and cannon fire deep over Germany. The balance of the war hung on a singular engineering problem: range. The Allies needed a predator that could travel as far as the prey, a fighter that could fly from England to Berlin, fight for its life, and fly home. That solution arrived in the form of the North American P-51 Mustang. The arrival of the P-51 was not just the introduction of a new machine. It was a shift in the fundamental physics of the air war. Originally designed for the British and powered by the underwhelming Allison engine, the airframe was aerodynamic gold waiting for a heart transplant. When British engineers mated the sleek, laminar floor wing of the Mustang with the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and, later, the Packard-built version, they created an alchemy of speed and endurance that defied the existing logic of aerial warfare. The Mustang was a revelation. It didn't just have the range, it had the ceiling and the speed to dictate the terms of engagement. It could loiter at 30,000 feet, ghosting along the top of the bomber streams, waiting for the Luftwaffe to climb up to meet them. For the German pilots, who had grown accustomed to attacking escorted bombers once they crossed the Rhine, the sight of single-engine American fighters deep in their home airspace was a psychological hammer blow. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, famously remarked that when he saw Mustangs over Berlin, he knew the war was lost. It was the beginning of total air dominance, a doctrine that would evolve over 80 years from the visceral, close-quarters gunfights of the propeller age to the silent, invisible slaughter of the stealth era. Inside the cockpit of AP-51D, the experience of combat was a sensory overload that demanded total physical integration between man and machine. The pilot sat on a parachute, strapped into a bucket seat that vibrated with the torque of the 1,600 horsepower Merlin V12 screaming just a few feet in front of his knees. The smell was a cocktail of high-octane aviation fuel, cordite, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. To fly the Mustang was to wrestle with physics. At high speeds, the controls stiffened, requiring immense upper body strength to haul the aircraft into a a turn that would drain the blood from the pilot's brain and narrow his vision to a grey tunnel. The combat doctrine was simple, but brutal: energy management. The Mustang pilot had to constantly balance his speed and altitude, trading one for the other in a deadly dance. When the Luftwaffe attacked, they often dove from high above, slashing through the bomber formations. The Mustang pilot had to spot the glint of sun on enemy canopy, drop his external fuel tanks which tumbled away like discarded skins, and push the throttle past the gate into war emergency power. The engine would roar with a deeper, more desperate note as the manifold pressure spiked, dragging the aircraft toward 440 miles per hour. The dogfight was a chaotic swirl of motion, where situational awareness was the difference between an ace and a casualty. There were no radars to guide the pilot to the enemy, no heat-seeking tones growling in his headset. There was only the MKI eyeball and a swivel of the neck. A pilot had to constantly check his six, the blind spot directly behind him, scanning the vast blue dome for the microscopic black dots that indicated enemy aircraft. When the merge happened, it was violent. Planes passed each other at combined closure rates of over 600 miles per hour, a blur of grey and crosses. The P-51 pilot would haul back on the stick, the G-forces crushing him into his seat, his anti-G suit squeezing his legs to keep the blood in his head. He was looking for a deflection shot, a mental calculation of trigonometry performed in a split second. He had to lead the target, firing his 6.50 caliber Browning M2 and machine guns into empty space where he predicted the enemy plane would be. When the rounds connected, they didn't just puncture, they shredded the convergence of 6 heavy machine guns, tore wings off, exploded fuel tanks, and shattered cockpits. The P-51 was a sword, and the pilot was a swordsman, relying on instinct, aggression, and the mechanical superiority of his mount to clear the skies. One of the most dramatic illustrations of this era's dominance was Big Week in early 1944, a deliberate campaign to lure the Luftwaffe into a decisive battle of of attrition. The Mustangs were the bait and the trap. They flew ahead of the bombers, ranging freely, hunting for the German airfields. They caught the Luftwaffe on the ground, during takeoff and in the climb. The Mustang pilots, aggressive and confident, began to destroy the German fighter force, pilot by pilot. It wasn't just about shooting down planes, it was about killing the expertise of the enemy. The experienced German experten were bleeding away, replaced by green novices who could barely fly their high-performance Bf-109s, let alone fight in them. By the time the Allies landed at Normandy, the Luftwaffe was a ghost of its former self. The P-51 had swept the board. It had proven that air superiority was not just a support function, it was the prerequisite for victory. The sight of a silver Mustang, gleaming in the sun with D-Day invasion stripes painted on its wings, became the symbol of American reach. It was the apex of piston engine technology, a machine that had pushed the propeller as far as it could go. But technology waits for no one. As the P-51s were strafing retreating columns in Germany, a new sound was tearing through the sky, the whine of the jet engine. The transition from the piston era to the jet age was rapid and disorienting. The P-51, for all its glory, was obsolete the moment the German Me-262 jet fighter appeared, though it arrived too late to change the war's outcome. The decades that followed saw a desperate race for speed and altitude. The F-86 Sabre in Korea, the F or Phantom in Vietnam, the F-15 Eagle in the Cold War, which was faster, climbed higher, and carried more missiles than the last. The philosophy shifted from the close-in knife fight of the Mustang to the beyond visual range BVR engagement. Whiters became the eyes of the pilot, and missiles became the sword. Yet, the fundamental vulnerability remained. If the enemy could see you, they could kill you. The proliferation of advanced Soviet surface-to-air missile systems and high-speed interceptors threatened to close the airspace that the P-51 had opened. The United States needed a new paradigm. It needed to stop trying to outrun the radar and start hiding from it. It needed the F-22 Raptor. 80 years after the Mustang first escorted bombers to Berlin, the concept of air superiority has evolved into a realm of science fiction made manifest. The F-22 Raptor is not merely a successor to the P-51. It is a creature from a different dimension of warfare. If the P-51 was a broadsword, the F-22 is a sniper in a pitch-black room. It was designed with a single, uncompromising goal: to enter the most heavily defended airspace on Earth, kill everything in the sky, and leave without ever being detected. The Raptor is the physical embodiment of air dominance, while the P-51 was built of aluminum and rivets. The F-22 is sculpted from exotic composites and radar-absorbent materials. Its angles calculated to scatter electromagnetic waves like water off a duck's back. To a radar operator on the ground, the F-22, a machine the size of a heavy bomber from World War II, appears as nothing more than a bumblebee or a marble if it appears at all. The pilot of an F-22 does not wrestle with the aircraft. The Raptor is flown by a fly-by-wire system that interprets the pilot's intentions and adjusts the control surfaces thousands of times per second. It is aerodynamically unstable, a trait that gives it supernatural maneuverability, kept in check only by its flight computers. The engines, to Pratt & Whitney F-119 turbofans, produce a staggering 70,000 pounds of thrust, but their true magic lies in the nozzles. They can vector tilt up and down by 20 degrees, allowing the Raptor to perform maneuvers that defy the laws of aerodynamics. It can slide through the air, point its nose at a target while moving in a different direction, and execute a Cobra maneuver that would stall and crash a P-51. But the Raptor's most dangerous weapon is not its movement, it is its mind. The sensor fusion of the F-22 takes data from its AESA radar, its electronic warfare suite, and external data links, and stitches them into a single, coherent picture of the battlefield. The pilot doesn't see raw radar blips, he sees a god's eye view of the entire theater, with enemies identified, tracked, and prioritized by the computer.
In the P-51 era, a pilot had to physically see the enemy to kill him. In the F-22 era, the kill chain begins long before the visual merge. The Raptor cruises at Mach 1.8 without using afterburners, a capability called supercruise. This allows it to impart massive kinetic energy to its AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles, extending their range significantly. An F-22 pilot can detect a flight of enemy fighters from over 100 miles away, lock onto them, and fire while still completely invisible to their sensors. The enemy pilots would never know they were in a fight. They would simply be flying one moment and exploding the next. This is the unfair fight that American doctrine demands. The chivalry of the Bud Anderson vs. Franz Stigler encounter, where a German ace escorted a damaged B-17 to safety, is a relic of the past. Modern air superiority is about ruthless, clinical efficiency. efficiency. It is about denying the enemy the ability to even understand how they are dying. The dominance of the F-22 has been proven not in a global war but in the simulated crucibles of training exercises like Red Flag. Here, the F-22 pilots fly against aggressor squadrons flying F-15s and F-16s that simulate advanced Russian or Chinese tactics. The results are often lopsided to the point of absurdity. In one famous early exercise, F-22s achieved a kill ratio of 144-0. They dismantled the opposition so thoroughly that the aggressor pilots complained they couldn't even find a target to shoot at. The Raptors would slip through the radar net, kill the enemy AWACS, airborne warning and control system, aircraft, and then pick off the fighters one by one. The F-15 pilots, flying one of the most successful fighters in history, reported Raptor cough, the distinct sensation of dying without ever seeing who shot you. The F-22 doesn't just win, it breaks the enemy's situational awareness. It turns their own sensors against them, ghosting in and out of detection thresholds, creating a chaotic environment where the adversary is fighting ghosts. However, the F-22 is not just a cold-blooded killer of other aircraft, it is a symbol of political will. Its operational history, while lacking the daily dogfights of World War II, is punctuated by moments of high drama that demonstrate its unique capabilities. Over Syria, F-22s were used not just for bombing, but to quarterback the strike packages. Their sensors were so powerful they could identify targets for other, less capable aircraft. They flew deep into the engagement zones of advanced Russian S-400 missile systems, operating with impunity in airspace that was theoretically denied. The Russians knew the Raptors were there, but they couldn't track them consistently enough to engage. It was a silent power play, a demonstration that the US could operate anywhere, anytime. More recently, the F-22 found itself in the public eye during the surreal Chinese spy balloon incident of 2023. While the target was a slow-moving balloon rather than a supersonic fighter, the mission highlighted the Raptor's extreme operational ceiling. The balloon was floating at over 60,000 feet, an altitude that most fighters struggle to reach with any stability. The P-51 Mustang struggled to reach 40,000 feet, its engine gasping for thin air. The F-22, designed to operate in the stratosphere, climbed easily to 58,000 feet. The pilot, callsign Frank, lined up the shot and fired a single AIM-9X Sidewinder. It was the first air-to-air kill of the F-22's career, a strange but telling debut. It demonstrated that 80 years after the P-51, the United States still possessed the only aircraft capable of reliably controlling the highest reaches of the atmosphere. The kill was precise, executed with a clinical perfection that belied the complexity of firing a missile in the thin air of near space. The lineage from the P-51 Mustang to the F-22 Raptor is a story of the relentless pursuit of the unfair advantage. In 1944, that advantage was a propeller-driven plane that could fly for 8 hours. In 2024, it is a stealth fighter that can fly at supersonic speeds without being seen. But despite the chasm in technology, the spirit remains the same. The P-51 pilot relied on the roar of the Merlin and the chatter of machine guns. The F-22 pilot relies on the silence of stealth and the hum of supercomputers. Both are apex predators of their time. The Mustang cleared the skies for the liberation of Europe. The Raptor clears the skies for the preservation of a global order. There is a profound dramatic irony in seeing these two aircraft fly together in heritage flights at airshows. The Mustang, small and loud, banking alongside the massive, silent Raptor. The P-51 looks like a toy compared to the F-22, yet it was the P-51 that fought the war that defined the modern world. The F-22, for all its power, is a deterrent, a weapon designed to be so terrifying that it never has to fight a war of that scale. The P-51 was the hammer that broke the Luftwaffe. The F-22 is the sword in the sheath, kept sharp to ensure no one dares to challenge the airspace it protects. Consider the sensory shift over these 8 decades. A P-51 pilot in a dive heard the wind screaming over the canopy, the engine rattling his teeth, the guns thumping against the airframe. He smelled the oil and the cordite. He felt the cold of the unpressurized cockpit biting through his leather jacket. He was a gladiator in a chariot. The F-22 pilot operates in a pressurized, climate-controlled bubble. The sound of the wind is a distant hiss. The engines are muted. The violence is abstract, displayed on high-definition screens. When he fires, there is a slight thump as the missile bay doors open and the ejectors punch the weapon into the slipstream. The missile ignites away from the aircraft to preserve the stealth coating. It is clean, detached, and terrifyingly effective. Yet, the human factor remains the constant variable. The right stuff that Chuck Yeager possessed when he became an ace in a day in a P-51 is the same quality required to manage the information overload of an F-22. The Mustang pilot had to calculate lead and drop in his head. head. The Raptor pilot has to manage a network of sensors and data links that connect him to satellites, ships, and other aircraft. The cognitive load has shifted from physical stick and rudder skills to systems management, but the core requirement, the aggressive will to dominate the adversary, is unchanged. The legacy of American air superiority is not just about the metal, it is about the doctrine. The P-51 proved that you must control the air to win the ground. It allowed the Allies to paralyze the German army in Normandy. The F-22 enforces that same doctrine today. It ensures that American ground forces never have to look up and worry about being bombed. For 80 years, no American soldier has been killed by an enemy aircraft. That statistic is the true legacy of the lineage from Mustang to Raptor. It is a shield built of speed, stealth, and firepower, forged in the factories of California and Georgia, and flown by generations of pilots who believe that second place in an aerial engagement is a death sentence. As we look at the F-22 today, facing its eventual retirement in favor of the next generation air dominance (NGAD) platform, we see the end of another chapter. Just as the Mustang gave way to the Sabre, the Raptor will give way to something faster, stealthier, and likely unmanned. But the DNA of the Mustang will always be there. The P-51 taught the Air Force that range matters, that speed kills, and that the best defense is a fighter that can hunt the enemy in their own backyard. The F-22 took those lessons and applied them to the electronic age. They are the bookends of a century of flight, two machines that defined what it meant to rule the sky. One was the savior of a burning world, the other is the guardian of a fragile peace. Together, they represent the unbroken arc of American air power, a story written in vapor trails and victories, from the flak-filled skies of Berlin to the silent, watching stratosphere of the 21st century. The Mustang roared so the Raptor could whisper, and in that silence, the sound of freedom is preserved.